I'm Katherine Spence, and welcome back to Behind the Narrative, and Happy New Year to all our listeners.
And I'm Ian King.
3 months ago, we launched this podcast with a simple ambition: to take you behind the headlines and into the minds of people shaping business today.
When we first sat down with Stu Jackson from Amazon, we wanted to understand what it really takes to lead global communications at one of the world's most influential companies. But what we discovered went far deeper than strategy, memos and media management.
Then we spoke with Sir Nigel Knowles, a true disruptor in the legal industry. His journey revealed something remarkable: how one person's willingness to challenge the status quo can reshape an entire sector.
And most recently, Helen Brocklebank took us into the world of British luxury. She talked about the intangible magic that makes UK brands so coveted globally and the careful balance between tradition and innovation that defines the sector.
What struck us across all three conversations was this: the narratives we see in the business press, the announcements, the crises, the victories, they're just the surface. Behind every headline is a person wrestling with complexity, making bold calls and learning as they go.
That's what this podcast is about. Not the sanitised versions of success, but the real stories, the defining moments, the choices that matter, the humanity beneath the headlines.
As we head into 2026, we're excited to go deeper still. We've lined up an exceptional slate of conversations with leaders across sectors: finance, technology, media, health and beyond. We'll be exploring the seismic shifts happening in the economy, the leadership challenges of our time, and the people brave enough to shape the future.
So whether you're a business leader navigating your own defining moment, an ambitious professional trying to understand how to chart your course, or simply someone curious about really what goes on behind closed doors in the world of global business, you're in the right place.
This is Behind the Narrative. Thanks for being here. Today, we're joined by Sir Ronnie Cohen, the pioneering philanthropist, venture capitalist, private equity investor, and social innovator.
A man who's fundamentally reshaped how we think about business, impact, and social change.
For decades, Sir Ronnie has been at the forefront of transforming capitalism itself. He co-founded Apax Partners, one of the world's leading private equity firms, but his real legacy extends far beyond the boardroom.
His influence spans from the corridors of Harvard to the halls of the British Museum. He's authored several books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller Impact, Reshaping Capitalism to Drive Real Change, which he re-released for an expanded second edition in November 2025.
But perhaps what makes Sir Ronnie's story most compelling is its beginning. Born in Egypt, he fled as a young refugee, a journey that would shape his lifelong commitment to creating opportunity and driving meaningful change in the world. Sir Ronnie, I hope you agree with that introduction. It's fantastic to have you here. We have your book that has been a bestseller and is now updated. Welcome. And I'd like to start, if I can, with impact investing, what it means and what it means today, because when you first set this up after Apax Partners, the world was very different.
It was, Katherine. Wonderful to be here with both of you, Katherine and Ian. The world was very different in the sense that impact investment hadn't really been defined, let alone developed, both of which have been achieved today. The starting point for my thinking was a task force which in 2000 the government asked me to chair on the subject of poverty. Why haven't governments made more progress in dealing with poverty and all the social issues it engenders? And the conclusion of that task force, and its report can still be found on the net, was that we hadn't brought investment to help tackle social issues and improve the lives of people. We'd been brilliant at inventing venture capital to fund those entrepreneurs who want to make money. We hadn't yet, we have by now, but we hadn't yet been brilliant at inventing ways of funding those who want to improve the world. And so impact investment has grown over the past 25 years from the search for what type of investment to developing the tools of investment, of entrepreneurship, of impact measurement, which are required to enable it really to reshape our whole economic system.
And when you were in that meeting and when you had that call in 2000, did you think it would work? What was the moment where you thought you were in a meeting and somebody said, yes, okay, I'll buy into that? Because it was quite a big leap to go from the PE world, which you were extremely successful in, to a different way to move capital.
Well, it wasn't, Katherine, in the sense that I always defined venture capital as the art of the impossible, right? You're backing entrepreneurs who are trying to do impossible things, not possible things, but impossible things. And you have to be able to assess, and it takes some judgment, which you build up over the years, whether this is likely to be feasible or not. My sense was if we'd been successful at inventing venture capital, which is today a $3.5 trillion sector, with private equity, its cousin, probably another $7 to $10 trillion. So it's become absolutely huge. If we've been brilliant at inventing new ways of funding those who want to make money, it had to be possible to do the same for those who want to improve the world. But it's easy to design something that is going to create money. How do you design something that is going to create social improvement, that's going to improve the lives of people who, for a variety of reasons, very often circumstances that have to do with their birth, are stuck in a rut and left behind as prosperity powers on and enables others to make huge wealth. So what was missing was that mechanism that leads you to attract to social issues the investment capital that would normally only go to those who are trying to make money.
And it's worked, and we'll talk about some of the amazing successes you've had. But just going back to that time, just for briefly again, do you need a UK, Eurozone, a world that is in growth for that to happen? Because it was different times then. You were part of that, the tech boom and the definition really of venture capital in shaping the technology revolutions, particularly in America. So do you need the world to be growing for this kind of atmosphere and for this to deliver the market returns that are needed?
No, it may seem intuitively as if a growing economy would help raise everybody or improve everybody's lives and raise people out of poverty. But the tech revolution, in a way, which I did not expect, exacerbated social inequality. Now, when I became a venture capitalist, I wanted to do good and do well. I was 26 years old. Venture capital didn't really exist. The biggest venture capital fund in the United States was just $2.5 million, tiny. And at that time, I thought, wow, if I can help create jobs in the UK, which had 3 million people unemployed, by creating young businesses that grow and create employment, that would really be a wonderful thing to do. I wanted to have more meaning in my life than just making money. Having said that, I knew that I needed to make money because my parents, as you mentioned, Katherine, left Egypt as refugees. We came to Britain with a suitcase, one suitcase each, and 10 Egyptian pounds, and that was it. Everything we had been seized. So I knew I would have to make money to look after my parents. But I didn't just want to make money. And I went to the United States to business school just as the tech revolution was beginning to be perceived. The microchip had been invented. The PC hadn't yet been invented. But people were beginning to talk about young entrepreneurs. Now, most of my classmates wanted to work for very big companies, IBM, General Motors, ICI in those days and so on. And they believed that innovation was really the domain of the big company with huge resources. I thought differently. I thought if you really want to think out of the box, then you can't be a prisoner of what's made you successful. You have to have a completely open mind, and young people have that. Also, you're not constrained by the experience and the difficulty of doing things that you acquire later in life. And so I felt venture capital would be huge, that actually the combination of technology and entrepreneurship would become a major phenomenon. And that's why I wanted to have my career in it. And so I thought, I'm going to create jobs. It's going to help social inequality. And I was right to the extent that the people who become entrepreneurs aren't the wealthy. They're the people who have nothing, right? They tend to be very ambitious out of necessity very often. And so I'd helped by the time, by 2000, I had helped a large number of entrepreneurs make fortunes and enrich people around them. At the same time, I realized that the gap between rich and poor was getting bigger and bigger, because those who didn't participate in the tech revolution and those who participated on the whole tended to be the educated ones. Those who didn't participate stagnated economically, more or less. They had the standard of living growth that came from the growth of the economy to which you referred, Katherine, but they didn't have these huge windfalls that you get when you exit from a venture and you make hundreds of millions of pounds. And so part of my motivation in accepting in 2000 the chairmanship of the Social Investment Task Force was to see how can we reduce these social gaps? How can we create a fairer society? So in a strange sort of way, the growth that came from tech exacerbated the social and economic differences that had existed before it.
Do you worry that we're seeing that again today? I mean, obviously, stupendous fortunes are being made, particularly in the US tech sector now. Do you worry that we're seeing a sort of replay of those?
It's a replay at bigger scale. Where we were talking of millions and billions, we're now talking of billions and trillions. Who ever thought that you could have a $3 trillion company, or that a person could be worth $500 billion and aspire to be worth $1 trillion. It's bigger than most countries. So, yes, and indeed, Ian, if you look at the statistics, the gap between rich and poor has widened to levels that we had not seen since the late 1920s. If you look at the salary, take the average salary of a chief executive of a company relative to the average employee. 40 years ago, it was 40 times. A CEO made 40 times an average employee. Do you know what the number is today? 347 times. 9 times bigger gap. And it's these huge gaps between rich and poor that have exacerbated the sense in half the population that didn't participate in this huge tech prosperity. Half that population feels democracy doesn't work. It affects our political system. It feels nobody's looking after me. So when you get a leader who may be more authoritarian, but comes along and says, I'm going to look after your interest, I'm going to make sure you get a fair deal, the elite is ripping you off, they believe it.
You don't take any comfort from the fact that people like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, they are committed to giving away most of their wealth?
Well, philanthropy can't fix our world. The reason philanthropy can't fix our world is philanthropy accounts for 1% of the world's investable assets, right? You have to get the whole economy to fix the world. How do you get the whole economy to fix the world? You realize that if capitalism has served us for over 200 years in pulling people up from poverty, its consequences today are so great, environmentally threatening the existence of our planet, socially threatening the stability of our democracies, that it can no longer continue in the same form. New times require new systems. We're living in a period of huge transition. Well, we're all aware of the climate transition, of the geopolitical transition, of the political transition, right? It's not surprising that our whole economy is also transitioning away from making money only to making money and creating positive good for people and for planet. And it may have sounded in the early days, as you were saying, Katherine, when you said the world was a different place then, that idea really didn't exist then. But if you look today, you see financial markets where $30 trillion went to environmental, social, and governance investment that sought to do good for the world as well as make a profit. We'd never had that before in the history of financial markets. You have $1 trillion market today in an area called sustainability-linked debt, where if a company borrows money and reaches an improvement target for people or for planet, it actually pays less on its debt than it otherwise would. So financial markets have started to transition. And the subject of my book is really that we cannot deal with the environmental and social issues we face without changing our economic system by bringing the effect on people and planet, which we call impact, alongside profit to incentivize the behavior of companies and investors.
What you've tried to do, Ronnie, as I can see, and as you've so eloquently said in your book, is it's not just about impact investing, it's about an impact economy. And you are creating this alternate model for investment for capital, which delivers market returns, which has a societal benefit, and which also has benefits for the investor and those around them, and wider ones with the environment. So that work is still ongoing. And as your advisor has reliably informed us, you are an optimist. So it sounds as though you feel there's still a lot to be done, but a lot has been achieved. You don't sound as though you're too pessimistic about where we are at the moment.
No, I am optimistic. I'm optimistic by nature, or you'd never become a venture capitalist if you were not. If you thought everything was bound to fail, you certainly wouldn't go into the line of investment that I went into. But I'm optimistic for evidence-based reasons rather than just by intuition. I can see a generation of young people now who don't want to buy the products of companies that are creating harm, environmental harm, or using child labor, or underpaying their people, or whatever. I see a generation of investors now, their parents, their siblings, which has understood that this trend, this change in consumer preferences, is going to affect the profitability of the investments they make.
But even in the Trump era, Ronnie, I mean, it's taken a big knock recently.
So the Trump era is a cycle, a political cycle. The trend continues. For example, do you believe that as a result of the Trump era, we're going to see fewer negative climate events? No. Climate is going to continue to worsen. What's going to happen post the Trump era? What's going to happen is there's going to be an acceleration of measures to try and fix the climate issue. There are already 25 countries across the world levying taxes on carbon emissions, right? So the train The train has left the station. And I think what is very powerful about the impact story is that it's actually about making more money by doing good and doing well at the same time. It isn't like philanthropy giving money away. It's saying, I'm going to invest in companies that are creating solar energy. And as China has done, I'm going to conquer that market. I'm going to conquer the market of electronic vehicles. I'm going to conquer the market of digital teaching by training 1 million people simultaneously in a customized way, across the world. I'm going to conquer the market of digital health diagnosis, treating people wherever they are in the world. So we're creating new markets, and these new markets are going to grow faster than the existing mature markets that we have. And in the same way that we had a wave of disruption because of the microchip, we're going to have a bigger wave but a similarly wide wave of disruption because of AI. So I think the Trump era thinking will certainly have an effect. It will certainly slow things down, but it won't change the trend.
It has created some strange ethical debates, though. I mean, if I think back to the period prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I mean, I used to hear from CEOs in the defence sector who were genuinely concerned about the sector being deprived of capital because so much money was flowing into ESG at that time. And obviously people have had to rethink what ESG is.
There's no doubt that the flow of capital to environmental is going to be slowed significantly. And that there's no doubt also that talking about dealing with inequities through economic system is going to be a lot less welcome in the United States in particular. But if you look at insurance companies that are paying now for the damage that comes from the fires in California, can they ignore climate? Or do they have to adapt to their premium to take into account the higher probability of a catastrophic weather event? And it can't just be a fire, it could be a flood, of course. If businesses want to protect themselves in the future against climate events, they have to take them into account. They have to create facilities that are not dependent, on things that can be disrupted by climate. And so the resilience of business, the risk of business needs to be managed today, taking into account not just environmental issues, but even social ones, because if a company becomes discredited for doing the wrong thing with its workforce or its supply chain, as we saw with Nike some years ago with child labor, it can have dire consequences on your sales. So I would say the political cycle is going downwards now for impact type of thinking, but the trend is on the way up, and companies are going to have to look through the political cycle if they want to assure their future.
Talking of political cycles, I'm just going to read a quote that you made actually quite a few years ago, but I think it's still very relevant. It was from an article, and you said, politicians are generally skeptical about the importance of economics in peacemaking. So we've been talking a little bit, I'd love to talk to you about this, Ronnie, because we've been talking a bit about the US and about the Eurozone and China. But when you have some less stable regimes around the world, and I know you've been heavily involved in Israel and the Middle East for many years from both a philanthropic and also impact investing perspective, we're in this situation now when we're recording today of a ceasefire situation. and you've invested in Gaza and the West Bank. What do you feel politicians need to be doing now? Do you feel your statement from all those years ago that there needs to be economics and rebuilding, and that needs to be front and centre? Is that still true today?
You may be surprised by what I'm about to say. The Middle East conflict is less of a conflict between Palestinians and Israelis than it is a conflict between extremists and moderates on both sides. I have spent more than 20 years now working through the Portland Trust to bring economic development to both sides.
And that's your charity you set up, isn't it?
And that's the foundation that Sir Harry Solomon and I set up in 2003.
Yeah.
To work on the economic dimensions of peace. The quote to which you referred came because we said to ourselves, everyone's been focusing on political deals and security considerations. No one's worrying about the economy. But if you look at conflicts across the world, the Irish conflict, the Central European conflict, and so on, a rising economic tide gets people to look to the future instead of dealing with the past, to worry about improving the welfare of their families, rather than to worry about the inequities of the past, which exist, on both sides. So that was the starting point. And what we do on the Palestinian side is to help economic development, to create jobs. As you say, we use some of the impact investment tools like social impact bonds for the creation of employment opportunities for young people, for the prevention of type 2 diabetes among women, for example, on the Palestinian side. And on the Israeli side, we focus on sectors of the population which have been left behind relative to the more prosperous side, which has benefited from the Israeli tech revolution.
Yeah.
Closer to home, I mean, you arrived in the UK as an 11-year-old boy when I imagine there was a fair bit of anti-Semitism around on the streets of London. You must be dismayed to see that creeping back into society in the way that it has done.
Funnily enough, I wasn't very aware. I live in Notting Hill now, but I wasn't very aware as an 11-year-old of the Notting Hill riots, which were at about that time. And throughout my life, I'm now 80 years old, throughout my life, most of which has been in the UK, I have virtually never faced real anti-Semitism. I may have found some disparaging remarks, here and there, but I've never found, now you could say with a name like Cohen, which is obviously a Jewish name, people aren't going to be very open about their anti-Semitism if they meet me. What's happened since Corbyn, really, and part of what has happened as a result of the Hamas attack and the social media, the organized social media effort to create opposition to Israel and to Jewish people, wherever they are, whatever their views are, whether they favor the policy of the government or not. I mean, for goodness sake, half the population is against this government within Israel. It goes out and protests every Saturday. 500,000 people have been out in the streets protesting against this government. You can't just paint the whole of Israel with the same brush that you would paint the Israeli government with. But the constant torrent of photos of terrible things and, frankly, the biased reporting, if you're on the ground, as I was when rockets were fired, which led to the deaths of Palestinians from the vicinity of a hospital. And people said it was an Israeli rocket. It wasn't. It was a Hamas rocket that failed and fell. But the media didn't pick it up. So I am very concerned today about anti-Semitism. It awakens in me fears that I read about in other countries, shall we say, in the 20s and 30s. The first anti-Semitic mayor was put in power in 1895 in Austria. And now we have Mamdani in New York preaching a global intifada and so on. It's worrying. It's worrying because it's being exploited. James Joyce wrote, anti-Semitism is the easiest prejudice to ferment, right? It's a prejudice that goes down 2,000 years of history to Christ and the blame that was placed for the death of Christ. And it took popes in recent years to begin to reverse the direction. But there was a taboo after the war because of the massive horrors of the Holocaust on being anti-Semitic. And now, as a result of all the social media hype, all the organized efforts to paint Jewish people and the supporters of Israel only in a bad light, that taboo has been lifted. It's become almost normal to hear anti-Semitic comments being made in the press by political figures and others and on TV. It's a very sad statement, really, about human nature, and it's unfortunately likely to backfire on very good Muslim citizens of all these different countries. Because you can't see the horrors perpetrated by ISIS and Hamas and not associate their supporters with these horrors. And at the end of the day, it's going to begin to dawn on people that if you perpetrate violence and you support it openly, there's something wrong with you. This isn't the way we in Britain are used to dealing with one another.
Well, you've talked about sort of extremism and moderates in a very eloquent way, and it makes me think of some of your stories when you first came to the UK, where your experience is very different. We've talked a little bit about, inevitably, given the world, we've talked a bit about sort of Islam and Judaism, but here, when you arrived, it was very different. If you could just talk to us about your sort of early experiences and your education. And I know you had a very inspiring history teacher at one point, but you have a fantastic story in coming to the UK.
Yeah. I think arriving in the UK from Egypt was to arrive in a place that was hugely organized, very clean, very orderly, where there was mutual respect, where you didn't hear honking every second in the street, and people being abusive to one another in public, right? I went to a grammar school in Edgware, in the north of London. It wasn't a distinguished school in any way, but it did have a new headmaster, Mr. Howes, who was a very intelligent man with very good ambitions for the school. And it had a history teacher to whom I owe the biggest debt. Apart from my university education at Oxford, my biggest debt is to Richard Farley, my history teacher, whom, by the way, I found 40 years after I left Orange Hill Grammar School, living in Loughborough, and had a continued relationship with him for several years before he passed away.
Very nice.
And my luck was that Richard Foley thought I was bright and said to me, Cohen, you should go to Oxford. I said, Mr. Foley, how am I going to get to Oxford from a school that's never sent anyone to Oxford except one person in the distant past? And he said to me, I'll coach you for your entrance exams. You had to pass from memory 8 entrance exams to get in. And the school didn't have a separate track to teach you. But I met with him regularly. He gave me a list, as I mentioned in the book, my first book, a list of 200 books to read, to prepare for my entrance exam. And I read them. And I have to tell you, when I was interviewed, because I also gave you a viva on top of the written exams, one of the dons asked me, said, who prepared you for your entrance exams? So that was a real stroke of luck. Now, what did it do for me? It taught me that everybody needs help and that luck plays a big role in all our lives in terms of whether we get that help or whether we're denied it, you know? And when I got into Oxford and walked through the gate of Exeter College, which was built in 1314, into the front, I had to pinch myself that Britain had given me the opportunity to be here. Of course, in those days, the education was paid for by the state. That created in me a great sense of obligation towards Britain and great admiration for its values and the way in which it welcomes foreigners.
Well, that's a very nice way, I think, to conclude our conversation. But before we do, we have one question that we like to ask our guests, which is, what is a secret that no one else knows that you'd be willing to share with us?
The secret is that I could have been a minister in the Blair administration.
Wow.
Really? Well, you were close to him. You got on very well with him when he came to power.
And with Gordon,
Brown yeah.
Subsequently. And at one stage, I was indirectly asked whether I would serve as a minister in the Blair cabinet. But I was very busy building Apax. My wife didn't think that the political career was the best thing for me or for us as a family. But I really didn't get to that second reservation because I was very busy building up Apax and I couldn't have done it.
Do you regret it? You'd have been a great asset.
I don't regret it because, Katherine, I've devoted my life to policy rather than politics. And something I was told by a prominent British businessman when I was still at Oxford about to leave was, you can influence politics from outside through policy, even more sometimes, if you have the experience and the knowledge to be able to bring constructive ideas. And so in some ways, a very important, a very rich part of my life has been to contribute to policy making around entrepreneurship, around social issues, around political conflicts. And now, really, this book is addressed not just to businesses and entrepreneurs and investors and philanthropists and consumers. It's addressed to governments because, to paraphrase Bill Clinton's line, it's the economic system, stupid.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Ronnie. An incredible conversation, a whiz through an extraordinary life, and could have spoken for hours more, but we have to wrap it up. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us so candidly and your incredible achievements and contributions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.